for the early stage investors, the risk is the greatest. For typically for LPs that come in when the permits are ready to be approved and the hardest, the biggest unknown is behind, it's less risky and it's more predictable.
Hey everyone, welcome to Investing for Generational Wealth. My name is Keshav Kalor, and I'm from Clive Capital, where I'm a principal and founder. At Clive Capital, we help high earners, primarily tech employees from companies like Amazon, Meta, Google, etc., just like you, invest outside the stock market to passively achieve long-term wealth through superior risk-adjusted returns, long-term passive income / cash flow, and tax benefits. So far, we've helped our investors passively invest into over 1,000 apartments under renovation and 500 single-family rental homes under development. And we're expanding into other asset classes as well, including industrial real estate, private debt, and oil and gas, primarily for the tax benefits. Before we begin, a quick disclaimer. We are not financial advisors. All investments are subject to risk, including the possible loss of the money you invest. So please perform your due diligence before making any financial decisions, and of course, consult your CPA, your attorney, your other financial and legal advisors and professionals in your life before beginning investments. My friend Eugene and I here, we just like to talk shop. This is purely educational, not advice. So today I'm joined by my guest, Eugene Gershman, and we are talking about development, multifamily versus single-family homes. Welcome, Eugene.
Hey, Keshav. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me here. It's a pleasure being here right before Thanksgiving, wrapping up our day on some fun topics and discussion.
Exactly, yeah. Appreciate you joining, and we thought we'd get some content out before everyone just passes out from food comas and some good old Thanksgiving food. So
That's right.
Cool. So today's guest is Eugene. Eugene, if you could please introduce yourself, where you started, what your journeys look like so far, and what you're up to today.
Absolutely. So Eugene Gershman with GIS companies. GIS development is my primary venture. And the reason we call it companies is because for every venture we set up, we create a new company. New project is a new LLC. We used to have a construction company that we ran for a long time. We actually just recently folded that. But nonetheless, very opportunistic. We're a family business, originally started by my father, who was a general contractor, and he had a dream that his children, my sister and I, would go into business with him. And growing up, I hated construction. So I went to college and I chose business as my major, thinking that there's no way I'm going to, and I loved finance. I was always on financial kind of services side early on. So I'm like, I'm going to get as far away from construction as I can. And sure enough, as I graduated, I I got a degree in economics first, and got my first internship at this investment firm where I was working on retirement plans, running financial models, and, kind of doing things that I wanted to do. Then I got bored. I went back to school, got my MBA. My last year of MBA, my dad calls me. He's like, hey, there's this cool project I'm looking at. They want us to open a branch in Central Europe and Hungary, and we would invest into this project. So we'd be on a developer side a little bit. We've never done development. We're always a contractor, but they also need a contractor. So we'll set up a construction company there. Do you want to take a look at the numbers? Because I really don't know how to understand all this, financial mumbo jumbo. I'm like, all right, fine, send it over to me. He sends me the numbers. I look it over, and it was pretty cool, complicated financial model. Call him back. I'm like, yeah, I think it's good. It's interesting. He's like, well, do you want to fly over here? I'm actually flying over to Budapest next week and meet with partners. Just, kind of help me out. Since you already know the numbers, you can ask some questions, clarify it. So we meet. I fly over there. We have a meeting, one after another. A couple of months go by. We exchange data, exchange more models, exchange more due diligence materials. 3 or 4 months later, my dad's like, all right, well, I think we're doing it. This sounds like an attractive opportunity. I wish I could have somebody that I could trust to set up an office there. Like, all right. I guess I'll go. So that's how I joined family business. Fast forward 20 years later, we're no longer doing construction. My dad is pretty much retired. and I realized how much work construction actually is. But development is a lot of fun. It's a lot more risk, a lot more reward. And I enjoy this. We primarily focus on multifamily. We still do some single family projects, and it's a lot of fun. So that's kind of my short story, short background.
What does your sister do?
She is mostly on marketing HR side of things. So when we ran a construction company, HR would take up so much of her time because it's constant people management. So now she finally switched more to accounting. She has a real estate license, so she helps us a lot with acquisitions, with dispositions of assets, and so it's and her husband actually is on a business development team, so he's usually the one meeting with potential partners. And I should have mentioned our main model is that we kind of ever since that project in Hungary that we focused on is instead of buying properties ourselves for development, we now almost exclusively partner with property owners to help them achieve their real estate development dreams and ambitions. And that way, uh, our partners get to experience the development project. A lot of them want to learn how to do it, and then their second project they do on their own. Some of them choose to be completely hands off and pass it on to us, and essentially become a passive investor after being an active, owner of real estate.
Nice. Okay. Interesting. So you and your sister are both in the family business still,
We
sounds
are.
like.
We
Nice.
we still are, yeah.
That's the dream.
Right. Holiday dinners are always fun.
Exactly. And deductible. No,
Right.
no tax advice. So okay. So I don't even know where to get started. I mean, we have, units under development right now. So we know, I guess you guys, when you do developments, what projects do you have going on right now? Tell us about locations and unit count,
Sure.
where they are in the development process.
Yeah, so we're primarily in the Pacific Northwest region, Western Washington, Seattle area, and presently we're sort of between projects. We have several things in the pipeline in permitting. One of our sort of flagship project that's coming up right now is a 300 unit apartment building in Tacoma, Washington. Our partners originally acquired it, I want to say back in 2019. And this was a perfect, sort of a classic example of the types of projects that we do. They've acquired this assemblage of consisted of 4 or 5 parcels. It's a half block assemblage in Tacoma. It's in a downtown region. They hired an architect. They started going down the path of development. They worked with a contractor who they've done a previous project with, but their development lead was not as experienced with this types of construction, and we got introduced during the time when they were looking for additional equity. And we met, we looked at the project, we looked at the numbers. At the time, we still had an active construction company, so that was helpful to us to kind of run through the numbers, the cost estimates. And that was kind of how the relationship started. Eventually, we replaced the development lead that they had working with them and became a full-time development partner for this project. So right now, it's still in permitting. We got our demolition permit last year, so we cleared the site, removed the old dilapidated buildings from 100 years ago. Now the site is clear and ready for vertical construction. We expect the permits to be approved here in the next few months, just in time for the spring construction start in Seattle. So that's kind of the main project we're working on. We have a boutique condominium development that we're wrapping up. It's like 99% finished. Condos are on the market right now. What else? We have a resort development with the same partner that's doing the Tacoma project. They recently acquired a resort. It's an island resort off the coast of Washington here. Historic site, very cool development. It's in super early conceptual stages right now, so I don't even know how many keys we would develop. Uh, we're still doing the studies, and in the meantime, we're looking at several different sites. Just yesterday, we met with a potential partner who has a site downtown Seattle that they want to develop. There is a smaller three residential parcel assemblage that we're looking at. So, City of Seattle recently allowed building ADUs and DADUs, detached ADUs, on the single family lots. And what state of Washington allows is condominiumizing them. So this property owner is thinking of building 3 units on each of the 3 lots, residential lots, for a 9 total unit development, condominiumizing them so that each individual small um, house, if you will, could be sold as a condo. So that's kind of another potential that we're studying right now, running numbers, kind of seeing if it pencils.
So how many units is that? And then in what markets? Across everything you have going on right now.
Well, I guess total units. Uh, well, under construction is just the condo building that we're completing. That's like 16 units. It's a boutique building. Uh, Total that we'll be adding once they all start. So Tacoma would be 300. The Island Resort could add another 200. So that would be 500. And then, if some of these smaller ones materialize, that might be another like 20, 30 units altogether.
Nice. Nice. What would you say to investors about why they should look at investing in developments as opposed to multifamily value add, which is, the tried and true bread and butter of a lot of syndications?
That's a good question. There are multiple ways to look at it. Some people, so let me back up. Uh, the reason people typically start development projects is, unless they're professional, real estate development investors, is because they somehow got a hold of a property. Either they bought it and held it for so many years, or it was in their family and they got inheritance, or they maybe rented an office space and then made a deal with an owner. So they already acquired real estate, and then they decided that for them to continue growing their investment, they should develop it. That's kind of one path of how development starts. And then there's professional development. Professional development is, just a niche of the market where people invest money specifically into real estate development projects. Now, the attraction of development is it's typically a lot more lucrative than investing in existing real estate assets. Everybody knows real estate appreciates over time, and usually it's just a matter of question of how long it's going to take for that real estate to appreciate. Development, on the other hand, is an opportunity to jumpstart and like realistically get from nothing to something huge. By, like, in our example, Tacoma project, it's raw land that has an opportunity to become the 7-story building just 2 years later. And so that's an excellent opportunity for an investor to come in and capitalize on this sort of almost instant growth. Now, of course, it comes with its own risks. So it's a niche for an investor. It's a niche investment that offers high returns and obviously with a high risk.
Got it. We had a question come in. What is your checklist to evaluate build sites in the city of Seattle?
Fun one. So, City of Seattle is an um, interesting animal. They just recently, I was reading a couple of weeks ago, I think, passed an ordinance in specifically downtown Seattle that would allow for new projects to bypass an entire land use review process. But typically, so things that we'll look at when we're doing the feasibility study is we'll look at the zoning, obviously, what is allowed to be built on the site. Uh, and when we look at the zoning, the key components of that is the type of development that is allowed, the height limit, the FAR, floor area ratio, which is literally a ratio of your total building not footprint, total building area divided by the square footage of the site. So typically, it's like a factor of 3 or 5, and that's a way uh, for the municipality to um, control the bulk of the building. So, for example, if your factor is 3, you could build 3 times the footprint of your site. So, if you were to build in the downtown area, property line to property line without any setbacks, you could build a 3-story building, or you could squeeze it and make it smaller, or make it like a little wedding cake design, and that way you can get to a higher uh, structure, maintaining the same bulk. So, FAR is a critical component. And then on uh, non-downtown sites, there are typically setback requirements: front setback, back setback, side setbacks. So those things have to be considered. How many total structures could be built, or what's the coverage ratio? A lot of the times, especially in residential zonings, there would be an impervious area ratio where your structure cannot physically occupy the entire lot, because they require a certain square footage of the site to be pervious for the rainwater to be able to get absorbed in the ground. Let's see what else. Parking requirement is an absolutely important parameter. Even though Seattle has been pushing this whole transportation initiative in the last few years, they eliminated parking requirements in many of their zonings, which a lot of developers capitalized on. But what's challenging is that there's a bunch of new buildings that are coming up now without any parking. And so the streets are flooded with cars because nobody knows where to park because people still drive around here. Um, so, things like that. What else? I think those are the main parameters that we take into consideration. And obviously the market, market demand, market supply, uh, financing, those are all the variables that go into the model.
What can an investor expect when they invest into a development deal? Just let's say it was raw land, like just blank slate all the way to finished product. Like, what does that process look like? And when can they expect returns? What about delays, going over budget? And then when you do get to returns, like what is the general return range for real estate, ground up real estate developments?
So the earlier you invest in real estate development project, the riskier um, is the investment. If you're starting out completely fresh with nothing else developed, then you are risking. Let's say you just bought the land and decided to develop it. You don't really know what it's going to be. You just know that it's a developable site and you want to build something. This is the highest level of risk. You may not be able to get a permit. You may discover that there is a buried, I don't know, Native American burial there that would prevent you from developing it ever. You may discover that, uh, I don't know, you may design a building, apply for permit, and every neighbor of yours will sue you because they don't like the color of your hair. And so that's the riskiest position to be. The farther down the road the project evolves, the less of a risk there is. And so typically, when we talk to investors, there's different classes of investments that we would offer. At the very early stage, that's the most speculative grade. And a lot of times, and this is part of the reason why we prefer partnering with property owners, is because a lot of the times the initial first few steps have already been made. And the owners have already determined that, yes, the site is developable. When we do our initial feasibility study, we would take soil samples, we would study the history of the site, we would look at the zoning, we would run conceptual models, we would talk to the architect, we would talk to a contractor. So we would investigate all of these things. So the risk goes down. Uh, then uh, so what we form at the very beginning is we typically form what we call a GP uh, part of the investment group, or general partners. Uh, General partners is typically about 1/3 of the total equity stack of the total capital stack. Then the other two-thirds is what we typically call LPs, limited partners. And that's the investment that we usually offer to truly passive investors. Sometimes we have passive investors in the GP stack as well. But LP side is where by the time we open LP investments, we would typically be way down the path on permitting. We would have the project usually at least 60% designed so that our contractor can come in and actually estimate the job. They would take all of the components, the structural plans, the civil plans, the interior plans, the fire protection plans, the smoke control plans, um, everything that plumbing, electrical, all of those things, and actually bid it out. They would send it out to their subcontractors. They would get the estimates. So it's not just some guy or a small team sitting in the office doing quantity takeoffs and multiplying it by dollars per square foot based on their past experience. This is actual bidding of the job. So the cost estimate that we get is fairly reasonable. Delays, very reasonable question. Nobody can control the city. That is one thing that's absolutely outside of everybody's control. They live on their own planet. They do whatever the hell they want to do. And it can take 3 years to get a permit. It could take 6 months. Back to the city of Seattle, they just said that they're eliminating the entire land use code review permit step, which used to take 2 years. So before you can even apply for a building permit, you had to get their design review board to approve your conceptual design, and that could easily take 2 years. So they're eliminating that entire step in order to stimulate growth in the city. I'm guessing they're probably trying to get more stuff built before the World Cup gets here in the next couple of years.
Mm.
So they got to hurry up.
Yeah.
So I forgot what the original question was. I was rambling for a long time, but hopefully I answered it.
What so like what does a timeline look like for a typical development deal? Like how long can investors expect the hold period to be? What are some exit strategies? Let's do those two first.
Okay, sounds good. So for a typical commercial project, the timeline from the beginning, from sort of ground zero to a completed building, stabilized, ready for exit, is usually about 5 years. The way we look at it is it's typically uh, 2 years to design and permit, 2 years to build, and 1 year to stabilize, meaning getting all your units leased up. So that's five-year cycle. After 5 years, the building is ready for uh, either a refinance or a sale. Residential projects, much faster. Single family projects are much faster. Typically, if it's a stock plan, something that's already been designed, you don't need to spend a ton of time fine tuning it. You would have to tie it to the site, of course. So that could take maybe, a couple months. Permitting, if it's a stock plan that's been permitted with the city before, shouldn't take too long, maybe another 2, 3 months, 6 months at the most. And then construction of a typical single family home, I would usually budget about a year. For a production builder, if you were to look at the sites that like Toll Brothers built, one of those national builders, they can complete a building much faster, partially because they build the same cookie cutters all over, and partially because their buildings, their houses are a little bit smaller on average than infill sites that we would typically look at. But yes, I think they can build a house like 6 to 9 months. I typically say let's budget a year. If it's a true custom home where it's completely custom design, completely custom interiors, I would tell clients budget for at least 18 months to build.
And then what would you say your typical return profiles look like? IRR, let's say.
So I personally don't like looking at IRRs. Of course, it's part of our model,
Mhm.
and I'll quote some numbers. But my benchmark is always 100% return on investment. And the reason I don't like focusing on IRRs is because time is a huge factor in the IRR, and
Yeah.
development process is there's a lot of timing variables. And so when we quote IRRs, we would have our, original schedule. But if the city doesn't give us the permit on the date when we expect it, then it might shift the entire model. And so it
Yeah.
doesn't mean that the project is not profitable, but it just means that, a 6 month delay, um, it's not even technically a delay, but it's a delay. But a 6 month delay like that could, cost us the IRR number. But typically speaking, so that's why 100% return on investment is my benchmark. If we don't get to 100% when we build a model, then I would recommend to not proceed with the project. Even if IRR sometimes are reasonable, it doesn't work for me. Uh, Normally on a commercial project like the apartment building, our LPs are expecting mid-teen returns. So somewhere in, between 14 to 16, 17. If we're talking to an institutional investor, they typically have their fees that they charge, and because they resell their investments, their funds to their retail investors, and so they like to throw in fees, and they want to see mid-teen returns with fees. It's something that we could negotiate, but that's kind of where we're at. For the GPs, my benchmark is about 20%, and
At
again,
what?
20% IRR
Okay.
for the GP side.
Okay.
And that's, kind of starting point. Ideally, I would like to see GP IRRs to be 25, 27%. But then again, that's where all of the risk comes in. Because typically GPs get paid last. So first
Yeah.
the lender gets paid, then LPs get paid, then GPs get paid.
Yeah. Okay. Another question. We have a few questions actually that came in. How do you convince sellers to lock up the property during the feasibility study, especially during hot sellers markets?
So during the hot sellers market, it's not as easy because a lot of sellers obviously just want to exit and run. But here's a few things that we discussed. Depends on the motivation of the seller. If we're talking to somebody who inherited a piece of land, like we just recently talked to this family, their mother passed away. They kids inherited the piece of land. It's a tear down. It's in a suburban neighborhood here. Um, New homes sell for about 2.5, $3 million. The tear down old house, I don't know, like 1,200 square feet. It's probably worth about $1 million, maybe 1, 2. They were looking to sell it. So the conversation that we had is we actually ended up losing it to another builder. So the conversation that we had is, look, what are you going to do with the money once you sell it? And that's the biggest motivator. If they say that, well, we're going to look to invest this money or 1031 into another piece of real estate because we like real estate investing, that's a perfect kind of candidate for us because then the sales pitch is don't sell it and roll it over. And that's where my motto comes in. Don't sell your land, develop it. Instead, keep your investment. You already have this land. You already have a ton of equity in it. Let's get it developed, and that way you will maintain your investment. You'll let it multiply, and then once you sell it, if you decide to sell it in the end versus rent it out, for example, but once you sell it, then you could talk about rolling money over to something else, maybe taking some off the table, keeping the original million in real estate, and then taking the profit and doing something else with it. So that's one motivator. Another is in the hot market, not so much a selling point, but in a down market, if you can't get the value, like in that case, they were trying to sell the land for or sell the house for 1.5. We knew that they wouldn't get 1.5. We said, look, it's worth maybe 1.2. But let's run the numbers and see what the numbers look like. So that way they get to invest the land in the project, and their contribution is going to be valued at what the appraisal basically shows what it's worth, and they get to see their investment grow.
And so, what would you say if the person wasn't interested in reinvesting it, wasn't interested in the real estate side of it?
Sorry, how do you mean? If they weren't interested, they would just sell it, right? Or
Okay, okay, that makes sense. Yeah. Well, I thought you said originally people usually say, "Hey, build it and we'll 1031," or "Build it and we'll do something else afterwards."
no, what I meant to say is that the motivation is what are they going to do with the money if they were to sell this land as is?
Yeah. Okay.
And so if they're a real estate investor and they have this land and they want to sell so that they could roll it over to something else, that's when our pitch comes in to say why roll it over now when you could develop and see it grow.
Got it. Okay. Okay. Next question: how do you evaluate utilities for each of your sites?
Well, I guess it depends on where the site is located, but typically it's a call to the city. Usually, utilities department is able to help out, or depending on where it is, obviously, city or county. But they're able to help out and help estimate if utilities are available. We're mostly an infill developer, so most of our projects are in urban core, so we know utilities are available. What gets more complicated is things like drainage, for example. On our townhomes project a couple of years ago, it was next to a creek, and the city's, and it was also slightly below the street level where all the storm drains were built. And so the city was very concerned about us flooding the creek in case of a massive storm. So we ended up working with a civil engineer, and that got discovered early. So it's not like we went all the way down the path and then got hit with this news. That was discovered at the pre-application meeting with the city there, which is something we would recommend doing every time you're doing a project. Have a pre-application meeting before you design the building. Just run the ideas by the city staff. Typically, they're very receptive of that, and in fact, they want it because they don't want you to spend a ton of time and money, apply for permit that they cannot approve, and then you be angry with them. So, on something like that, civil reviewer for the city met with us, looked at the site, and advised our civil engineer to design storm management system that would accommodate the storm drainage. And and the civil engineer explained to us what that means. It was a lot of fancy words, but what it actually meant is we would have to build a giant vault, bury it in the ground, make sure that the water accumulates in there. It would have to be calculated for what they call a 100-year storm. So the worst storm that we had on record for the last 100 years. And make sure that the vault would be able to hold all that water and then slowly discharge it into the creek or into the ground. So, but basically, short answer is we study it, we call the city, we calculate. On a recent downtown project, we had an issue with power. The power was available, but the power company made us buy our own um, uh, transformer. And the transformer wasn't the difficult part. It was like a $50,000 toy. But the challenging thing for us is it required a giant room because their rules said that the vault that holds the transformer had to be able to accommodate a transformer one size greater in case sometime in the future we decide to upgrade. And so in our case, it was a boutique building. We're like, look, we're never going to upgrade. Like, this is what it is. And they're like, well, we don't care what you think. The code says that it's got to be that way. And so there was a lot of push and pull because that it was literally a giant room that was took up like fifth of the footprint of the site and required high clearance that we had to fight with because it was just a waste of real estate for us.
Okay. Let's see. Another question. What's your opinion on both tear down to rebuild and adding ADU units? Is tear down more risky but higher return?
Teardown is definitely more risky. Um, I would say, as far as returns, it depends. You would have to run the numbers. I personally am not a huge fan of the typical house flips. I mean, everybody's seen those cute little shows where they rebuild an old house and make it look all pretty. I've seen it done tastefully. Usually, um, it looks to me like lipstick on a pig,
Mhm.
and I don't see a lot of actual value being added. So let's say in that example that I mentioned before with inheritance, let's say we took that $1 million house And for it to be in the decent condition, we would have to pretty much gut it. That would include, I mean, maybe even redoing all the drywall. They may include rewiring a lot of things. That would include plumbing, definitely cabinets, flooring, tile, countertops, all of the new fixtures, new roof, probably new driveway. Is it less expensive doing all that than tearing it down and building a new house? Well, let's look at what we kept. We kept the foundation, and we kept maybe framing. Foundation concrete work has become expensive recently. Framing has also become fairly expensive, but still, your framing in our market, you would pay maybe, I don't know, $30 a square foot for labor to frame the house. Yeah, I mean, it could be significant, but I'd say run the numbers and do an estimate. My concern again is that the value you would create by doing all that would not be sufficient to justify all the work that you put into it to make it look good. So it would still your record would still say that this house was built in 1953, and even though it may look new, on paper it's an old house, and you're not going to be able to sell it for $3 million. If you were to tear down and rebuild, you'd be able to sell a new house for, I don't know, 2.9 to 3.2, something like that, in that particular neighborhood. So that's an important consideration. ADUs are definitely something worth considering, especially like what they're allowing in Seattle right now, where you can condominiumize them, and you can literally convert your ADU into a standalone tax parcel. It's a little tricky with insurance and condo laws, but still, if you could sell an ADU separately, for example, or sell it as a package, and then the buyer could rent it out, that's an additional revenue stream.
What is, and I'm curious here. So, what's the kind of worst experience you had in the entitlement phase, like the land acquisition, entitlement, getting approvals from the city?
NIMBYs, one word, NIMBYs.
Mm.
Not in my backyard. So the worst experience, we had this property. We submitted for, so this was kind of a redesign. We originally proposed a building that was kind of unique, and this is this boutique property that I was talking about in Bellevue. We originally proposed a cool, unique concept. It was a 200-foot tower on a tiny footprint. Then we hit the GFC, the Great Financial Crisis, 2008. We pulled the plug on the project. And in 2015, we decided to redesign it. So we met with the architect. We came up with a new concept. We decided to build a mid-rise that we could build ourselves. And it's downtown zoning, so we could go property line to property line. And our neighbors had, it was another condo building. They had, so their building was like long and narrow. It was kind of one of those unusual blocks where it had two streets on both sides.
Huh.
And their windows were facing two of the major streets mostly. But at the end that was facing us, their building stepped back a little bit, and they had some of the windows from, I believe, their kitchens and part of their dining rooms that were overlooking our site. So when we started talking about redesigning this building, we had that concern with an architect that those guys might not be happy, because now all of a sudden our wall, and we're going to build property line to property line. So this means we would have a blank wall on the property line facing their building. They might not get too happy. So we met with them. We called we knew who the property manager was. Property manager put us in touch with their HOA. The president of the HOA replied, and we talked. She was very pleasant on the phone. We talked. She said, well, send us your plans. Obviously, it's a potential concern. You're getting too close. So we did that. And she fired back pretty nasty emails, something like, this is, this needs to be investigated. We don't know if this is legal. What laws are you following? This is not too cool. And we're like, wait, hold on. Everything's fine. It's not that scary. Let's get together. Let's talk. We actually thought about it. Let us show you what we've designed and bring all the neighbors. We'll buy drinks and, we're neighbors. We just want to be neighborly. We want to be friendly. We want it to be cool. So, like, okay, fine. We set up the meeting, rented a restaurant across the street, brought in the architect, built a scale model. We printed a ton of renderings. Bought, it was an Italian restaurant, so antipasti, wine, um, pretty good spread. And the architect made a presentation. They listened politely. Then they started asking questions. It was mostly civil. And then we kind of ended the formal. It was about, I don't know, maybe 45 minutes long. Then we ended up the formal part of the presentation and said, look, feel free to come up, look at the renderings behind us, look at the scale model. We're happy to explain. And on the scale model, we actually built part of their building so they could see how close it is, but also that it's not that bad. Excuse me. So we thought that went well. After about an hour and a half, they all left. We were celebrating. We stayed at a restaurant. We're like, great, good win.
That definitely
And
solved
then,
the problem.
and then the next day, they fired every one of, well, not everyone, but probably at least a dozen of the people that attended the meeting, fired an email to the city with their objections and complaints. None of them had any legal basis. They just didn't like the fact that we're building too close to them. Legally, we're allowed to build property line to property line. Legally, we were following all the codes. We weren't asking for any departures from the code. We weren't asking for any variables. We were trying to be as friendly. In fact, one of the corners of the building we shaved off specifically to allow more light to go to their building and to preserve some of there was a little parklet about a block and a half away that they could have seen from their windows. So we wanted to preserve that view. None of that mattered. Eventually, the city gave us the land use permit because, again, we were following the codes. The city staff had no basis to deny us the permit. But the code allowed them to appeal that decision within 14 days. Sure enough, within 2 weeks, they filed an appeal. When an appeal like that is filed, it has to go in front of the hearing examiner. So the city hires an independent third-party hearing examiner, usually a former judge or somebody who's used to it. It's basically a court proceedings. It looks exactly like the court proceedings. It's at the city hall, and instead of the judge, it's this hearing examiner who listens to both parties. Everybody, they bring their witnesses and expert witnesses, and these guys built. They called this demonstrative, where they built two wood walls that were, I think, like 2.5 feet apart, because that would have been the narrowest part. They didn't have any window. It was their stair tower that's protruding. That was about 2.5 feet away from our building. And they were trying to say that if we build our wall so close to them, they wouldn't be able to maintain their facade. And this guy is bringing this giant sledgehammer. He's like, "Look, I wouldn't be able to remove the siding of our building if we had a problem." And then the hearing examiner goes, "Well, is this the only tool you could use?" And he's like, "No." It's like, "Are there smaller tools you could use?" He's like, "Well, yes." So, anyways, that was a long process. We ended up winning. They ended up filing a lawsuit after they lost the appeal. After a little while, they dropped the lawsuit. The president of the HOA, who we later found out owned the unit that was facing us, so she was the most vocal in this thing. She ended up selling her unit and moving out. And then the rest of the neighbors said, the hell with it, just proceed with it. We're tired of spending money. And so, but we lost about real money in legal fees, probably a couple $100,000, and at least 2 years of our lives. So,
Wow.
things like that happen.
Yeah. One of my partners, he's responsible primarily for getting entitlements done and approvals from the city. And he's told countless stories about people opposing what he has to say at the city council meetings. And, we do multifamily, like built to rent developments. So even if we say we're doing a housing development, people will come in and say, oh, they're bringing in this commercial development or industrial development. There's going to be a lot of noise. Yeah. half the time people, it's like other people who are your biggest obstacles as a developer.
Right.
And then people wonder why there's a housing shortage. So
Exactly.
yeah, he
Exactly.
always tells me it's not easy being a developer. But for us, one of our biggest things was a 100 unit development that we have going on right now. When we started the project, we got all of our approvals and everything. And the city told us from a utilities perspective, we'd be fine. We thought, great, we're just going to do our horizontal work, like putting the utilities in, all that stuff. And they came back and said, hey, we need a sewer treatment plant on site. So that delayed the project by about a year and cost us an extra 800 grand that we hadn't originally anticipated. So,
Right. Yeah, I mean, it could be frustrating, and that's why I'm saying that for the early stage investors, the risk is the greatest. For typically for LPs that come in when the permits are ready to be approved, and the hardest, the biggest unknown is behind. It's less risky and it's more predictable. Uh, I like seeing construction uh, cost to be already estimated. I like seeing building plans to be at least 65, 70% done. And I when we work on projects, that's my biggest pet peeve. A lot of times, property owners come to us with already designed buildings because they hired an architect, they hired an engineer, and they sometimes even gotten permit, but struggled getting the project financed. They come to us and they said, "Would you partner with us? We already have a permit. We just need some money, and we're ready to go." And then I started looking at the plans, and I see the details are not worked out.
yeah,
uh, Specific building details, interior design is not done. And I'm like, you don't know how much this building is going to cost. That is the biggest variable right now that you're seeing. Yes, you're past all the permits. You think you got the hard part done, but you cut so many corners getting here. You're risking possibly millions if you don't do it right. I was recently writing something and I found this quote by, I'm trying to look it up, quote by Frank Lloyd Wright. He said, "You can use an eraser on the drafting table or a sledgehammer on a construction site.
yeah,
Anything could be fixed,
yeah,
but what would you rather do?"
right. Cool. We're coming up on top of the hour. So with that, we have a lot of great questions coming in, but we'll provide Eugene's contact information and folks definitely feel free to reach out. Eugene, what would you, going back when you first started in the business, that first project with your dad, what advice would you give younger Eugene, knowing what you know now?
Planning, planning. Make sure that everything is thought of, and bring in as many experienced people to the table as you can. That was probably my biggest mistake because I was too confident in the beginning. I was young. I just got my MBA. I thought I knew everything about everything, and I didn't know a lot of things. And for you to plan for all of these unknowns, you have to deal with people who know what they're doing. And so that's the key. If you're passively invested in projects, make sure that the team you're working with knows what they're doing and they've done it before. If you're actively developing a project, make sure you bring to the table people that have done it before. I love seeing younger developers, or younger not in age but in experience, to attempt to develop their properties. And I say that's great, but bring somebody who knows what they're doing. Don't be stingy, especially early on. Don't be stingy with the money. It Any penny that you save in the beginning might cost you 10 or 100 times more down the road. So that's the biggest advice.
Money or equity, as far as like giving them a slice of the pie. Yeah.
Right, of course, of course.
Okay. And would you say your, biggest roadblock or failure, not, let's say, what was your biggest failure or thing that didn't go as planned? Was it that 2 year holdup or was it something else?
Oh, we had lots of failures. I mean, we had projects go completely south. We had, that project that got delayed. That wasn't really our fault. I wouldn't call it a failure. It was just an experience. It was a learning. But uh, we had few construction fails. We built a house once. Well, we put in a foundation, and later found out that the house was That foundation was placed at an angle, and at one point it was about 10 feet away from where it was supposed to be. The surveyor ran it, our superintendent ran it, the city inspected it multiple times. Nobody caught it until one day we were doing a walkthrough with an architect and kind of looking at the plans, looking at the site, and seeing that things didn't quite add up. Like the tree's supposed to be here, but it's there, and we're like, "What's going on?" And then we brought in a different survey, and we found out. So that was pretty painful. We had a house designed once based on a poor advice of one of the subcontractors, who it was on a steep slope. He recommended us placing the row of piles, forget about 15 feet away or 16 feet away from the street. And then he disappeared. He stopped returning phone calls. We hired a different driller who was supposed to put the piles in, and the driller said, "There's no way you can do that. My rig won't reach from farther than 12 feet." He's like, "You're going to have to build another wall so that we could put a bridge, so that I could put a rig on it, and then I could install those piles." And we already had permits in hand and all engineering done. So that ended up costing us a ton of money. So, things like that, again, relying on people with insufficient experience, and ended up costing us a lot of money.
Okay. Lastly, for those who want to, for folks listening here right now and at home, what's the best way to reach you?
So I'm accessible pretty much everywhere on the internet. I'm on LinkedIn, Eugene Gershman. I'm on most social media sites, EG_developer. My company's website is giscompanies.co. And I host a podcast called Real Estate Development, Land to Legacy. That's available on most podcasting sites. And finally, my personal email, eg@giscompanies.co.
Okay. Yeah, we'll definitely include all that contact information in the show notes. So, with that, thank you very much for coming in to educate us about developments, Eugene.
You're welcome. You're welcome. It's a pleasure being here. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching, you guys.
Yeah. So, to learn more about developments, feel free to reach out to Eugene at the various contact methods that he mentioned. And like I said, we'll be including his contact information in the show notes as well. So thanks again for taking time out of your busy schedule. And also to those of you listening at home, I know it's, the day before Thanksgiving. So don't forget to like and subscribe to our podcast on whichever platform you're listening to make sure we can continue bringing you the best educational content. If you could give us a review, that'd really help us out wherever you're listening, and we'd really appreciate it. So thanks, everyone. Have a great Thanksgiving. And until next time, keep learning to invest for generational wealth.